Welcome to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and today we'll be taking a look at G.I. Joe, the role-playing game. Now, I've done reviews on both Power Rangers and Transformers, both by Renegade Game Studios, so G.I. Joe is very much in a similar vein as those two products. They are mission-focused. You go on a mission, you do combat, you come back, and you do it all over again. So where does this actually differ from all the others? Well, let's crack the book open and let's find out. So here we have our G.I. Joe, the role-playing game core rulebook, published by Renegade Game Studios. Copyright is 2022, so fairly new if you're watching this at its current iteration. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back of the book and see what we have. In the G.I. Joe role-playing game, create your own Joe by choosing your military training origin, personal traits, and role within the G.I. Joe organization to become a real American hero and save the day. Fighting for freedom wherever there is trouble, G.I. Joe is there. Anyways, let's open this bad boy up and see what there is to be seen inside. Now, I will say, I really have been liking all of these inside covers for the different Essence 20 systems, like Power Rangers and Transformers. It's just not your standard, one color page spread. I really do appreciate that they made some sort of a design that kind of fits the universe that you're about to get into. So, really cool, even though it's nothing really pertinent. It doesn't give you a whole lot of information or anything like that. Still really cool that they've kind of did something a little extra. So our book can be divided into about 3 different sections. Of course, you're going to have your character creation sections, have the how to play section, and then you're going to have information for the GM, which at the very end of the book, you'll have a introductory adventure for your new Joes to play around in. And so we're actually going to start with character creation as we always do. Character creation can be broken down into about 7 steps. First, you start with the character concept. Then you determine your essence scores and your skill points. You'll select 1 to 3 influences. You'll select an origin. You'll select a role for your character, and then you get to describe your character, and then you'll form bonds with your squad mates or your other teammates. Influences are what your character has done outside of the service to G.I. Joe. So let's take a look. We actually have quite a number of influences to play around with, from adventurer, artisan, athlete, checkered past, gearhead, green shirt, martial artist, nomad, professional, small town roots, specialist, and thrill seeker. Now, with each of these influences, you're going to get a specific perk for that influence. Like, for example, thrill seeker, you're at your best when acting on impulse. When you act recklessly or go headlong into a dangerous situation without concern for your safety, when not in combat, you gain an edge on strength or speed skill checks. Your GM is the arbiter of when this kicks in and should only apply when there's significant risk of danger. In addition, if you've selected more than one influence on your second or third influence, you get some sort of a hang-up. This is something that your GM can pull out during play that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for you to do something. For example, with Thrill Seeker, you're an adrenaline junkie, and 3 times per mission, you feel the need to make things more difficult just to prove you can overcome. You suffer a snag on a single strength or speed skill test as you make things more difficult. You can suggest when this comes into play, but it is your GM's call and may apply to any strength or speed roll, including in combat. You do get some suggested characteristics for how to roleplay as somebody with that influence. I don't really care for those too much because my character is my own character and I probably already have some sort of concept in mind for that. But I do appreciate the Thrill Seeker bonds. These are little background bonds that kind of relate to your character and how they think. Next we have Origin, and the Origin primarily centers around what branch of the military, if any, your Joe has served in before recruitment. And I really do appreciate that they specify different branches and how that just because you're in the Army, you can actually have different origins, like the Air Force pilot origin or the pilot origin, but you're still part of the Army branch. And I really do appreciate that they do that for every single branch of the military. So we do have an explanation about the Army, and we have the soldier origin as one. And for each origin, you get an essence score increase. It's a either or situation. You get an origin skill, you get your starting health, and you also get your movement speed, your base movement speed, which for the soldier origin is 35 feet, and movement isn't reduced by wearing heavy armor or carrying a heavy load. And there are different branches or different origins that give slightly different movement speeds and might actually grant you some others, like I believe the Navy or the sailor origin gives you swimming movement, which is pretty interesting. I guess soldiers don't know how to swim. But our different origins are soldier origin, you have the sailor origins, you have the pilot origins, and the Air Force right there. Then you have the non-branch specific support origins, like the first responder origin. And I really do appreciate that they have other origins that aren't tied to, the military branches. You have the covert ops origin, the intelligence origin, and then you have some non-military origins like the civilian origin, engineer origin, scientist origin. So really cool that they've given you options to be in the military, but also giving you some options to not be in the military. Then you have your roles. There are 7 different roles to choose from, and your roles are basically like your class if you're thinking in other role-playing terms. Now, with each role, you do get some perks, some of which require story points to activate. You get training in 2 essences and role skills in which the skill points granted from these essence increases must be spent. You get additional equipment, training, and qualification, a selection of benefits shared by all members of G.I. Joe, which we'll take a look at that ability here in a little bit. And you get a choice of 1 of 3 role focuses that helps refine your character. So basically like specialization, you're specializing in a certain branch of that class or role. So the different roles we have to play around with are the commando. Their focus options include the infiltrator, the sniper, and the spy. Then we have the infantry. Their focus options include artillery, mechanized infantry, and medic. Then we have the officer. Their focus options include battlefield psychologist, frontline leader, and grandmaster. Then we have the ranger, which I chose for my character creation video. Their focus options include beastmaster, predator, and scout. Then we have the renegade. Basically, these guys are hired by G.I. Joe just so Cobra can't recruit them. Kind of funny that way. Their focus options include blitzer, door kicker, and tank. Then we have the technician. Their focus options include expert, think tank, and tinkerer. And then we have the vanguard. These are like your defenders. Their focus options include bodyguard, heavy ordnance, and juggernaut. Now, I didn't cover equipment in my character creation video since your gear can change from mission to mission depending on mission parameters and such. Put simply, every role has training and qualifications that allow them to choose gear. Weapons are generic, and it's really the upgrades that make them unique. So for example, your weapons, you'll have things like close combat blade, pistol, rifle, shotgun, but you do get some common examples. Like for rifle, you have bolt action rifle, lever action rifle. For frag grenades, you have things like golf ball grenade or stick grenade. You get things like that. And I will say this for the upgrades, both the weapons and the armor upgrades, there are quite a few number of them. There's a lot to play around with. And I really do appreciate that, especially for a game that's as straightforward as, going from mission to mission and, fighting through enemies and things like that. That can get pretty repetitive and boring. But what could really make it stand out or make your Joe feel like an actual true hero are the things that you can do or avoid. And that's really where the upgrades come into play. So for armor or battle dress, we do get some different armors, and I actually do like that it's not as generic as some of the other games might have made their armor systems. You actually get like impulse armor, lined with vibrating proximity sensors, giving wearers advanced warning to jump for cover. Gives you evasion +1. And that's actually really cool. I really do appreciate that you do have like some unique armors. And then, of course, you get a whole bunch of upgrades for those as well. Kits make a return and are more in common with what you'd find in the Transformers RPG. So you have your standard medicine kit, you have the limited burglary kit, and then you've got like a restricted climbing kit. And there's different ways of acquiring kits, but then there's also gears. And there's a ton of gear. You have a lot of options when it comes to gear. Just like little things like business clothes, grants +2 cleverness defense when worn in an appropriate setting. Little things like that really make this game a little bit more unique than just going from mission to mission and fighting the bad guys. So I really do appreciate that. Something different this time around is the inclusion of pets. You actually have organic pets and you have drone pets. Like with much of the equipment, you don't get a specific pet, but you rather build it from the ground up. So you choose a form, you choose a size and a function. And the only difference between the actual organic pets and the drones is that drones actually get upgrades. And that is actually really cool. So would you rather have a dog that can just bite, or would you rather have a drone that can do a lot of different things? Actually, don't answer that because I'm pretty sure a lot of people would still go for the dog. So let's say that you want to perform an action. The Essence 20 system has a very different way of going about this. You still get to roll a d20, that's always going to remain the same, but this time around you add a dice modifier. Skills are ranked from D2 all the way to D12. When you roll a skill test, you grab a d20 and the skill dice, either d2, d6, d8, d10, or d12, and you roll them together and add the results. Now, if you are specialized in a skill, for example, let's say that my character is specialized in intimidation, specifically frightening other characters or NPCs, and they have an actual d6 in intimidation. That means I would roll my d20 and my d6, and I would get to roll all of the dice underneath the d6. So in this case, the d6, d4, and the d2. Now, with those three dice, I only take the highest number, the one that's going to give me the best result, and add that to my d20. So it's a way of making investing in different specializations and skills a lot more worth it. And I really do like this. And so speaking of skills, what actual skills do we have to work with? Now remember, there are 4 different essences or abilities. We have strength, speed, smarts, and social. For strength, our skills are athletics, brawn, conditioning, intimidation, and might. For speed, we have acrobatics, driving, finesse, infiltration, initiative, and targeting. For smarts, we have alertness, culture, science, survival, and technology. And for social, we have animal handling, deception, performance, persuasion, and streetwise. There are only 2 skills out of the whole skill list that do not have specializations, and those are initiative and conditioning. Conditioning is basically a straight increase of your hit points, and initiative is just the dice that you roll with your d20 whenever you roll for initiative during combat. I really do like the skills and the specializations that work here. You do get sample specializations, but of course you can always create your own specializations with your GM's permission if it makes sense. It also adds another layer of, making your Joe unique, or unique in the sense of being part of the team. Combat is translated in the same way. To begin with, everybody rolls for initiative, which is a skill with ranks. If you want to attack, roll with the appropriate skill. It's either going to be targeting for ranged attacks or either might or finesse for melee attacks. You compare the result against the opponent's toughness or evasion. where things get a little bit dicey, and I've said this in my Transformers review, is how speed really comes into play. Speed actually determines how many actions you can perform in combat. If your speed is 1, then you can only perform a move or standard action. At speed 2, you can perform both of those. At speed 3 or above, you can perform both in addition to a free action. Now, free actions are things that hardly take up time, but some actions actually require more than one free action to perform. You can convert a standard action into 2 free actions, and there is a way to use your standard action to perform a movement. So you do have options. There are all sorts of modifiers as well. If there are size differences, then you'll look at the size adjustment matrix to determine if you get an upshift or a downshift, which is the Essence 20's way of increasing or decreasing your skill die. And speaking of which, there is the dice shift ladder. So you always have access to D2, D4, D6, D8, D10, and D12. Let's say that I'm at a D10 and I get an upshift. That means I go up to the D12. Now there are ways of increasing that above a D12. For example, I might have a lot of different advantages that make me progress up to the 2D8 or maybe 3D6, or an automatic success or an automatic critical success. Likewise, I can go lower than a D2. For example, I roll just a single D20, or I automatically fail, or I automatically fumble. That's bad, by the way. This is definitely one of the types of games where I'm gonna want to buy a GM screen so I can constantly be looking for these different modifiers and how to apply them. There are rules for underwater combat and zero-G combat as well, so that's actually much appreciated. I didn't think I missed that in the Transformers, but then again, you're a big giant robot. Is that really going to come into play a whole lot? Maybe, maybe not. But I do appreciate that there is underwater combat and zero-G combat here. You also have mounted combat this time around, so you can ride on a horse. And there are rules for that. Mainly just, controlling your mount and things of that nature. Vehicle combat does make a return. There's really nothing special about these rules, and I know I always say that. The book is just telling you that, yeah, vehicles are a thing, and you can engage in combat in one. I think more care and attention was given to what happens when your vehicle reaches 0 HP than the vehicles themselves. Speaking of which, there are a ton of vehicles, both on the Joe side and Cobra side. So you have things like your APC, Dragonfly XH1, your little jetpack. Now, I actually really do like the artwork for these pieces of equipment, by the way. It kind of makes me think that they're ripped off from the toys. I don't know, it looks very toy nature-y. So, I do appreciate that. So, what does the GM get to play around with? A ton of Cobras, that's what. Also, there are mercenaries, red ninjas, and as stated before, vehicles. I really miss the table that we got in Transformers that breaks down all the threats in the book by threat level. Considering how many threats there are to play around with in this book, that would have been a really big help. All of the major players are included though, from Cobra Commander, Baroness, Destro, Dr. Mindbender, as well as some mooks like Cobra Apprentices, Vipers, and Officers. Really cool, and I really do appreciate that there's like a ton of variety. Like, just not like aesthetically, but also between different factions and different threat levels. So, really cool. One of my major complaints with Transformers in terms of their threats was that there wasn't a whole lot for the lower levels, but there's definitely a lot to play around with here. So not only do you get Cobras to play around with, you get some mercenaries, which, I mean, I would just consider them to be Cobras anyways. But, I mean, honestly, I thought Tomax and Xamot were part of Cobra anyway, considering that they always were with Cobra Commander, but I guess that's not always the case. So, I don't know. I've only watched like half a season of the first original season, so there we go. You also get some red ninjas, which is also pretty cool. So you're not always having to fight, your standard mercenaries. You can get some ninjas that'll sneak up on you and do some other stuff. And then you get some vehicles like the Claw, the covert light aerial weapon, the Stinger, the Ferret. Not very many pictures of these like we saw with Joe's side. Yeah, I kind of really did like those toy-like blueprint pictures, but whatevers. I'm just glad that we actually get some vehicles to play with on the Cobra side, because, you got to have Joe vehicles and Cobra vehicles clashing together like a 7-year-old with those toys. In addition to the threats, we also get a chapter on locations. I actually have mixed feelings on this chapter. There are a few locations that are actually unique, like the Pit and Cobra Island, but everything else seems to be generic. At least there are plot seeds for each location. Like, for example, we have urban areas. Yeah, that's generic. Or war zone battlefield or battle space. But you always get like some plot ideas, some plot seeds to go along with those. At the end of the book, we get the Snake Pit Adventure. Spoilers for those who plan on playing through this adventure. This is your only opportunity to back out now. Part 1 welcomes the PCs to the Pit, or G.I. Joe headquarters. Unfortunately, since you're all newly recruited, you've been left behind to guard the base while everyone else gets to go on a super cool mission. You have been given some tasks to complete, some of which includes training. You'll go to each of the different areas on base to complete skill tests, which may or may not help you later on. This is pretty standard. Introductory adventures usually give PCs a safe place to learn how skill tests work. At some point, though, there's a blackout. Oh no, a Cobra squad is attacking. Part 2 has Beef the Cobra operative that can control robotic spiders attacking the base. Why a person of this nature doesn't control snakes or, cobras is beyond my guess, actually. I actually think they address it somewhere in this adventure too. Anyways, you have to dispatch of the spiders, but be quick. Beef is only a distraction while Scar Squad tries to hack into the G.I. Joe database. If PCs catch onto this ploy, they can drive Scar Squad back to the motor pool where they'll try to run. You can either take them out there, or you can be led on this really cool epic car chase to finish the actual adventure. Overall, this is a fairly satisfactory introductory adventure for G.I. Joe. It really does depend upon your players actually doing a little bit of role-playing as they go from location to location within the base during Act 1 and really getting most out of, those skill test rolls and whatnot. Otherwise, this would be a very quick adventure. Like with Power Rangers and Transformers, the introduction chapter really sets the tone for this book. It begins with General Hawk's debrief as he details the cast and dangers of Cobra and their key players. Really do like this section of the introduction chapter. In addition, you get a brief snapshot of most of the Joes on the team, and I do mean brief. You get their specialty and a quote from them that really doesn't do much for me. In fact, my major complaint with this is that they didn't stat any of the Joes. I mean, that's always going to be my complaint. They didn't stat any Transformers or Autobots from the Transformers book. They didn't stat any Joes in this book, which is a real shame because I would have liked to have used them as something more than just, NPC dialogue fodder. The layout for this book is pretty much what you would find in Power Rangers and Transformers. But I feel like the equipment section is a lot cleaner. Having tables for your items and such is such a great idea. Having the tables makes it quick and easy to find what you're looking for. The art is fantastic across the board, and I didn't really have a problem with anything. Most of it is very comic book style, and a future pitch reference, instead of artwork, can we get pics of the toys, toy model, especially for some of these Joes and Cobras. That would have been really cool, actually, like as a little Easter egg, just seeing the toys. But hey, we got something akin to that with the vehicles on the Joe side, so I can't really complain that much. Now, let me preface this by saying I did not grow up with G.I. Joe, both the cartoons or the action figures, but I will say that this is by far my favorite game of the Essence 20 system. The reason this is my favorite iteration of the Essence 20 system is, well, let's take a look at Power Rangers. Teenagers who transform into superpowered beings that also go into giant Megazords. That's pretty niche. At most, you could probably do something like Kamen Rider with that. Maybe if you really wanted to do something like Pacific Rim, you might be able to pull that off. But that's really niche. Transformers. Mech or robots that can transform into vehicles and do other things like that. That's also pretty niche. Again, there isn't really a whole lot that I can see you doing with that system or with that mechanic of transforming and things like that. With G.I. Joe, it's military based. That's pretty generic, but that's also where its strengths lie. There's a lot of things to do here, lots of equipment to look into, and that's what I really like about this, is the fact that it's generic enough that I can take it and pull it apart and make whatever I want with it. For example, I can see myself pulling off an XCOM game with this, hunting down aliens that are trying to invade Earth and things like that. This would be perfect for that, and there is no XCOM role-playing game as far as I know. So I would love to do that with this system. Would I run this for my group? I can see myself doing it. There are adventures that you can actually run if you don't want to come up with your own. Again, as I've said before, I would love to do an XCOM system based on this actual system. There's enough game to keep a campaign going. Yes, I do agree with that. And to kind of put things into perspective, this book is about 350 pages. That's quite a bit. For an RPG book. Power Rangers was, about 255 pages, and Transformers was about 282 pages. So there's a lot going on in this book, and I think a lot of it was probably the equipment. If for whatever reason I wanted to get a newish group into the Essence 20 system, this would be where I would start. It's generic enough, I can pull it apart, it's clean, it's tight, I can do what I want, even if it is missing a couple tables that I would have really found useful, and I would just have fun going at it. So if you actually like Power Rangers, Transformers, G.I. Joe, you like all three of those franchises, then you're probably going to want to get this guy. This is the Field Guide to Action and Adventure. It's got tips on combining all three of those franchises into one awesome adventure. I will be taking a look at this in the future, but there are options. There's expansions coming. Cobra, I forget what they're called, but there's a source book on just Cobra itself, so you can play as the bad guys. There's going to be one for Decepticons as well, and Power Rangers, they just get source books for, I think they have one for space, so all of the different Power Rangers franchises that have gone into space, it's detailed in that book. But as far as G.I. Joe is concerned, I definitely would recommend this if you're into mission-based gameplay, or you're looking for something a little bit more militaristic that is almost like a fusion between maybe board game miniature style mixed with some light role playing. Anyways, that's going to do it for now. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and I will see you guys in the next video.